Hey Mustangs, welcome to your first official online notes of the school year. Before we get started with the notes, a couple of things. First, you're going to need to go to the class website and print your notes. So what you do is you go to the class website and you click on Honors Notes. And when you get to that page, you're going to see Scientific Method Notes. You click on that and you print them 2 pages per sheet. If you don't know how to print 2 pages per sheet, on this same page here on the class website, click on directions for printing 2 pages per sheet and it'll explain how to do that. Okay? Now the second thing, while you're watching the video, feel free to pause and rewind. Now just like in class where I have you guys write something down and then I explain it, same thing here on the notes. So when you see me transition from one slide to the next, you can go ahead and pause it, write down the information, then hit play and I will explain that information. So let's go ahead and get started on the notes. All right, scientific method. Let's take a look and find out what it's all about. So first, scientific method is a series of steps taken to answer a question. So the questions that you have, if you go through the steps of the scientific method, they will take you closer and closer to your answer to that question. So answering questions is one thing that the scientific method can help us do. Second, it's an organized way of studying the world, the natural world. So since the beginning of time, human beings have been curious about why things work in the world the way they do. Everywhere from lightning, mountains, ocean currents, animal behavior, humans are interested as to why things work that way. So the scientific method can actually help us answer those questions. And finally, last thing to remember about the scientific method is that it's a natural, instinctive human process. So it's not a series of rigid steps that scientists have just created to solve experiments. It's the way the human brain naturally gets to solve a problem or answer a question. So in every day-to-day life, you actually go through the steps of the scientific method in your head to solve problems and answer questions. All right, so the 6 official steps of the scientific method. We're going to go through each one of these. Here I'm just going to list them for you first, and then we'll go through each one at a time. So 1, make an observation. Step 2, ask a question and do research. Step 3, form a hypothesis based on that research. Step 4, experiment. Step 5, collect and analyze data. And then step 6, draw conclusions. Now, a lot of people think that conclusion is the dead end. That's where the scientific method ends. But it's actually not. 2 things can happen after you get to the conclusion step. So one thing is if your hypothesis is supported. If your hypothesis is supported, you're not done yet. You can't just do an experiment once, get results, and expect everyone to accept those results. So officially, you have to repeat the experiment over and over again. So you would go back to step 4, experiment, and see if you get similar results. So you repeat, 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 and if you get similar results, you publish, and your results go out into the scientific community. Second thing, if your hypothesis is rejected. If your hypothesis is rejected, again, conclusion isn't the dead end there. You actually go back to step number 3. You form a new hypothesis. Just because your hypothesis was incorrect the first time doesn't mean you stop there. You form a new hypothesis, you experiment again, and you see if that's the possible answer. All right, so step 1, observations. We use our senses to look at the world around us. And when we're using our senses to gather all this information, it naturally gets us thinking about questions. So from observations, we go to questions, and then finally to experimentation. So I'm going to use an example here, kind of a grade school example, elementary school example of a possible observation that you might see that would lead to questions and then experimentation. So in this case, it's the classic fertilizer example. So I see people using fertilizer on their plants. So that's an observation. You're using your senses, your sense of sight. You notice something happening. Wow, people are using fertilizer on their plants. That is going to lead you to a question next. All right, now when you're doing an experiment, at the very beginning, you state your question because that gives you a goal and it helps you focus during your experiment. What is it that I'm trying to solve here? What is it that I'm trying to figure out? So stating that question at the beginning of your experiment is essential. So in this case with the fertilizer example, does fertilizer cause plants to grow faster? Now this is just one possible question that you can actually come up with. There's several other ones that different people can think of with this fertilizer example, and that's okay. Step 3, forming your hypothesis. So remember, big thing here, hypothesis is an educated explanation, not a guess. So your hypothesis is one possible answer to your question. So when you're forming your hypothesis, there's 4 major things that you want to keep in mind. Okay? So first, your hypothesis should be based on research, no guessing. You want to take a look and see what other people have done in relation to your question, and use that to help you create a good hypothesis. If you do, you're going to get closer to your answer. Okay? Second thing, remember hypothesis is just one possible answer to your question. So that means while you're trying to form your hypothesis, you might come up with several. You're going to want to write those down, because if your top hypothesis, the one that you think is the answer, doesn't work out, you'd move on to the next one. Third thing, your hypothesis must be testable. If you can't test it, you have to throw out the hypothesis. Fourth thing, the big thing here to remember is that your hypothesis is not always going to be correct, and it's okay for it not to be correct. If you look at all the experiments that have ever been done and all the hypotheses that have ever been created, there's been way more hypotheses that have been wrong than have been correct. If all hypotheses were correct, we know everything by now. Okay? So forming a hypothesis and it being wrong is an okay thing, because it's getting you closer and closer to the answer that you're looking for. All right, last thing on this slide here, when you pose your statement, you want to pose your hypothesis as what you think is going to happen in the experiment. So you can use an if-then statement, or you can use an I think statement. For me, I'm more comfortable with I think than an if-then. But either way, whatever works for you. So in this case, with the fertilizer example, I think that plants grown with fertilizer will grow faster than plants grown without fertilizer because, and you also state why. So that research that you did will help you come up with a because in this case. All right. Next step, design an experiment. So if you've ever done a science experiment before, you've gone through these steps. So you want to make a materials list. You want to find out, what am I going to need to actually go through this experiment and complete this experiment. So you create a list and you gather your materials. Next, you do your procedure. Step-by-step, detailed procedure. At first, it might just be what you think you're going to do, but as you complete the experiment, you want to be as detailed as possible with your procedure, even the ones that we do in class. So make sure that you're detailed as possible with your procedures. And then finally, when you're actually performing your experiment, there's one thing to keep in mind. Remember I said your hypothesis is probably going to be wrong, and that's okay. More likely to be wrong than is correct, but it gets you closer to the answer. So when you perform your experiment, it's important to perform it without bias. Okay? Without bias means you don't want to try to do your experiment so that your hypothesis turns out to be correct when it's not, or not correct, be supported when it's not. Okay? So an example here, global climate change. There's a lot of people out there that think that scientists have made it all up. Now, the scientific community doesn't work that way though. Some people say, oh, they're making it up for political reasons and stuff like that. But the scientific community checks each other. They keep each other in check. So with global climate change, if someone were to falsify data, stuff like that, there's going to be a scientist out there that's going to call them at it. And with global climate change, there's hundreds of scientists out there, not just 10 or so. There's hundreds of scientists out there that have gathered tons of data, not just images like this, but tons of data that support global climate change. Now, whether it's something that we're doing with carbon dioxide emissions, or it's a natural process in our planet's ever-changing ways, who knows? But it's clear that our planet is changing very rapidly right now, so global climate change. Now, in the scientific community, like I said, if a scientist was to falsify data, they keep each other in check. So if you're a fan of the Big Bang Theory, you notice that they're friends, but they're often competing with each other. So this competitiveness among scientists, they're rooting for each other. They're hoping people find answers, but at the same time, they kind of want to be the one that finds the answer. So I think the Big Bang Theory is a good example of how the scientific community kind of works, where they basically keep each other in check and keep each other honest. So that competitiveness keeps each other honest. So it's a good thing for us as well. All right, next step, collecting and analyzing data. So to collect and analyze data, scientists often use tools and get numbers. And when they get those numbers, they record them in tables, which help them analyze the data. So most people are comfortable with numbers. People love seeing numbers. I mean, there's so many studies out there where people want to see the numbers. They love statistics. So that's one way we can collect data is through numbers, measurements, and stuff like that. So it could be size, volume, weight, temperature, etc. The second way to collect and analyze data is using our senses to make detailed descriptions and observations. That one people are a little sketchy with because people feel that a scientist might be biased. But it's also accepted in the scientific community. If you make really good detailed observations and descriptions about something and you journal it, that's accepted as data as well. All right. Also, going along with collecting and analyzing data, you're going to take your data, usually you collect it as numbers and tables and stuff like that, but if you really, really want to see trends, if you want to see what's happening in your experiment, you take that data and you put it into graphs and charts. So the graphs and charts make it really clear to see if your hypothesis is supported or rejected. It helps you see if your results are reliable or if there's been possible errors in your experiment. And then finally, looking at those graphs and charts, it helps you form a conclusion for your experiment. So it's really good. It's a good visual way. It's what our human brain actually likes, to actually see these trends and patterns in these graphs and charts. All right, finally, step 6, drawing conclusions. So after you have done every other step, steps 1 through 5, you're going to take a look at everything and state whether your hypothesis is supported or rejected. Not right or wrong, supported or rejected. Okay. Second thing, in an experiment, remember that your hypothesis can be disproven, but you can never say your hypothesis has been proven. You can't be 100% on anything. So if your hypothesis is supported, that means, yeah, it's a possible answer to your question, but there might be others out there. So we can never say it's proven. We say our hypothesis is supported. Next, if a hypothesis is incorrect, make sure you form a new hypothesis. So remember, conclusion isn't the dead end. There's more beyond the conclusion. And then finally, experiments must be repeatable with similar results to be accepted. If you can't get the similar results, then your hypothesis has to be thrown out and you have to create a new experiment. So you must get the same results over and over and over again in order to say your hypothesis is supported. All right, so there are the steps of the scientific method, all 6 main steps of the scientific method, and of course the cycle that we see going on with the scientific method. So don't forget, scientific method, it's good for science experiments and it's also good for life.